You know, there are some cases that just get under your skin. They're these dark, twisting mysteries that have a connection to something even bigger, even more infamous. Well, today we're diving into one of those. This is the story of Sherry Jo Bates.
And this is the big question, right? The one that's been haunting investigators and true crime fans for over 50 years. Did the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror actually begin years earlier with this one brutal murder in Southern California? We're going to follow the clues and see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the murder itself, who Sherry Jo was and what happened that night. Then we'll look at the absolutely chilling letters that started to show up. From there, we'll build the case for that Zodiac connection. But then, and this is key, we're going to unravel it with some serious doubts, hoaxes, and even DNA evidence. And finally, we'll see where this all leaves us today.
Okay, so to really understand the mystery, we have to start at the beginning, with the victim and the night her life was so violently stolen. Let's head back to Riverside, California, October 1966.
So, who was Sherry Jo Bates? Well, from everything we know, she was just this amazing young woman. Only 18 years old, a freshman in college, an honor student, a former cheerleader, a sweet, outgoing person with her whole life ahead of her. She's the last person you'd ever imagine ending up at the center of a story this dark. And what's so chilling about this timeline is just how normal it is. It's a Sunday. She goes to church. She leaves a simple note for her dad saying she's going to the library. A totally ordinary day. But somewhere between the library closing at 9 p.m. and the next morning, everything went horribly, horribly wrong. And her body was found on Halloween morning, of all days. Okay, so the crime scene, it tells a really brutal story. Police quickly came up with the theory. The killer had messed with her car, disabling it, probably to get her to come with them, maybe offering help. They found a man's watch torn right off the attacker's wrist in the struggle, military-style boot prints, and maybe the most important clue of all, the killer's skin and hair under Sherry Jo's fingernails. She fought back. Hard.
As if the crime itself wasn't horrifying enough, about a month later, the killer decided they wanted to talk. And this began a pattern of taunting and terror that would become an infamous signature.
I mean, can you imagine reading this? This dialogue came from a typewritten letter sent to the police in a local newspaper. And here's the thing, it included details about how her car was disabled, details the public didn't know. So police knew almost for sure this was from the killer. It was just so cold, so calculated, and designed to create fear.
And then it gets even creepier. 6 months go by, and this poem is discovered carved into a desk at the college library. The language is just so violent and disturbing, but it wasn't just the words, it was the handwriting itself that would later become a critical piece of this entire puzzle. And then, another set of letters. This time, the message was way more direct. A flat-out promise that this wasn't over, that more people were going to die. So you see the pattern here, right? We have a killer who isn't satisfied with just the act of murder. They have this incredible compulsion to brag about it, to take credit, and to spread as much terror as possible. For a few years, this was this horrible but still local tragedy, but then a string of murders kicked off up in Northern California, and suddenly a new name entered the American vocabulary, a name that would change everything: the Zodiac. So this table really lays it all out, why people started connecting these dots. I mean, look at it. The taunting letters sent to the media, check. The focus on young victims, check. And the real clincher, handwriting experts looked at that desk poem from Riverside and said it was an unquestionable match to the Zodiac's letters. And then came this, what for decades seemed like the smoking gun. In 1971, the Zodiac himself writes a letter and basically takes credit. He calls it "my Riverside activity." For a lot of people, that was it. Case closed. The killer himself was admitting the connection.
But hold on, because this is a case where nothing is as straightforward as it seems. For every piece of evidence that seems to lock this theory in place, there's a counter-argument. And in recent years, a few bombshells have dropped that have completely shaken this entire connection. So, let's go back to that desk poem, remember? This was the strongest link. In 1970, a top-tier expert, a guy named Sherwood Morrill, was absolutely certain. He said it was an unquestionable match, and for decades, that single opinion was the bedrock of this entire theory. But what's really interesting is that even back then, not everyone was on board. You had the famous Zodiac journalist Paul Avery and the handwriting experts who were totally convinced. But the Riverside Police Department, the guys actually working the case on the ground, they were always kind of skeptical. They just weren't 100% sold on the link.
And that skepticism, turns out, it was dead on. For more than 50 years, the theory stood strong. Then, in 2020, everything got turned completely upside down.
And this is the stunner. The Riverside Police announced that they got a DNA hit off an old envelope stamp from one of those confession letters, and it identified the author. And guess what? It wasn't the killer. It was a guy who, when he was just a teenager, sent the letters as a sick joke, a distasteful hoax to get attention. Just like that, one of the biggest pieces of evidence linking Bates to Zodiac completely fell apart.
So if it wasn't the Zodiac, then who was it? Well, the most famous Zodiac suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, was ruled out of the Bates murder by DNA and prints. More recently, another name, Gary Post, was floated by a private group, but police said there was no real evidence. The Riverside Police do say there is one person they're still interested in, but right now they just don't have enough to charge them.
So where does all of this leave us? After all the twists and turns, the letters, the suspects, the DNA, what's the final word on the murder of Cheri Jo Bates? The hard truth is, we're still without an answer. The Zodiac connection, which for so long seemed like a sure thing, is now officially unproven and honestly pretty unlikely in the eyes of investigators. The murder of Cheri Jo Bates is still officially a cold case. Her killer, whoever he was, got away with it. And that just leaves you with this one final thought to chew on. When a case gets as famous as this one, when it becomes a legend, does all that attention actually help find the truth? Or does the intense focus on one big, flashy theory, like the Zodiac, end up blinding everyone to other possibilities that might have been hiding in plain sight all along? It's something to think about for this case and for any mystery that grabs hold of us and won't let go.
You know, for over half a century, one name has been the absolute ghost of American true crime, the Zodiac Killer. He terrorized Northern California with murders and bizarre codes, and then, poof, he was gone. But what if that ghost, after all this time, finally has a name? Let's get into it.
This was always his ultimate taunt, right? The ciphers. He literally promised his name was buried in all these weird symbols. For decades, they were completely unsolvable. But then, in 2021, a team of investigators came forward and said they didn't just find the key, they kicked the door down. Now, to really understand why this new claim is such a massive deal, we have to go back. Way back to a time when this hooded figure basically became the face of random, terrifying evil, turning quiet, romantic spots into absolute nightmares. And this is the face that has defined the case forever. It's based on what witnesses saw, and it became this icon of true crime. The scary part, it could be anyone, which for 50 years meant it was no one.
The Zodiac's confirmed spree was just shockingly brutal and fast. It all happened in less than a year, starting in late '68 and ending in October of '69. In that short time, 5 people were killed. 2 more were left with scars you can't even imagine, and the entire region was just paralyzed with fear. But here's the thing. 5 confirmed victims might have just been the beginning. In those creepy letters he sent, the Zodiac boasted that he'd killed a total of 37 people. So, was he just lying to create more panic, or is the true number of his victims still out there, just waiting to be uncovered? That number, 37, is a huge part of his terrifying legend. Okay, so after decades of nothing, total dead ends, the story takes this incredibly sharp turn. An independent team of investigators drops a bombshell that sends shockwaves through the entire true crime community. And this wasn't just some new fan theory. This was a team that calls themselves the Case Breakers. We're talking about 40 specialists, former cops, people from military intelligence, journalists. They claimed they finally had their man. And the name they put forward? Gary Francis Post, an Air Force vet who worked as a house painter. A guy who, on the surface, seemed to live a pretty normal life, and who passed away back in 2018. The Case Breakers believe he was hiding one of the darkest secrets imaginable. So here it is, the piece of evidence that hits you right in the gut. On the left, you've got Gary Post. On the right, the Samus sketch. The Case Breakers want you to look at one thing in particular, the forehead. They claim those scars are a dead-on match. So you're probably thinking, okay, a scar. Is that really enough to close the case this big? Well, the case breakers say that's just the tip of the iceberg. They've put together a whole case they believe proves without a doubt that Post was the Zodiac. All right, let's unpack what they've got. It starts with those forehead scars, which they say came from a car wreck in 1959. Then they claim his full name is the secret key to one of those unsolved ciphers. Plus, they have witnesses who say he was a violent guy who actually confessed to being the Zodiac. It's a pretty compelling web of connections. This quote from a former Army counterintelligence agent on the team really gets to the core of their cipher theory. The argument is that it was designed to be personal. You literally couldn't crack the code unless you already knew the killer's full name. It's like a perfect circle of secrecy that protected him for all those years. But they don't stop there. The team tries to rewrite the entire Zodiac timeline by connecting Posty to the murder of Sherry Jo Bates way back in 1966. And their smoking gun? A watch found at the crime scene, splattered with paint. And what did Gary Posty do for a living? You guessed it, he was a house painter. Of course, this is the Zodiac case we're talking about. The second that theory starts to feel solid, the doubt starts to creep in. And sure enough, the official law enforcement agencies that have been working this case for decades, well, they have a very different opinion. So you've got this huge divide. The case breakers are saying their evidence is irrefutable, and they even cite an alleged FBI whistleblower who says Posit has been on the radar for years. But the FBI and the San Francisco Police Department are publicly saying, nope, the case is still open, still unsolved. And it isn't just law enforcement pushing back. Tom Voigt, a guy who's been an expert on this case for years and runs the ZodiacKiller.com website, he did not hold back. He called the whole theory hot garbage. That's a pretty big clash between the new investigators and the established experts. Voigt goes right for the throat, attacking their biggest piece of evidence, the scars. He claims no witness ever even mentioned scars on the Zodiac's forehead. He thinks the artist just drew them in to add some detail to the face. And, just like that, the irrefutable evidence starts to look pretty refutable. And the official denials are really specific. The police in Riverside flat out say the Sherry Jo Bates murder has nothing to do with the Zodiac. And get this, they say a so-called confession letter in that case turned out to be a total hoax, written by a teenager who later admitted it. That 1-2 punch really starts to pick apart the casebreakers' claims. So, where does all this leave us? We've got this incredibly detailed, compelling case built against one man, and at the same time, a powerful, official rejection of that exact same case. Have we finally solved it? Or has this whole mystery just gotten way more complicated? When you lay it all out like this, you can really see the problem. For every single piece of evidence the casebreakers bring up, the scars, the cipher, the so-called confessions, the link to the Bates murder, there's a strong counter-argument from either an expert or the police. It's a perfect stalemate, and the truth is still just out of reach. As you can imagine, this has all gotten pretty tense. The casebreakers are not backing down one bit. They're now accusing law enforcement of botching the investigation and mishandling evidence. They're actually demanding a full review, basically suggesting there's either a cover-up or just plain incompetence. Which brings us right back to the one haunting question. After all of this, is Gary Francis Post really the Zodiac? Or is he just the most recent, most convincing name in a dark mystery that we as a culture just refuse to let go of? Maybe after all this time, the real ghost isn't the killer anymore, but our own desperate need for an answer.